Welcome to another inspiring episode of the Elite Expert Insider Podcast. Hosts Melanie Johnson and Jenn Foster are the owners of Elite Online Publishing. They're both Wall Street Journal, USA Today best-selling authors. We're really glad you're here because this podcast was designed for you. Meet industry experts that share their secrets and strategies. Get successful results for your business in money, relationships, health, and your life. Each episode is going to inspire you to take action towards reaching your greatness.
Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast today. We hope we are having a super great week. I'm your host, Melanie Johnson, along with Jenn Foster today. Hey, Jenn.
Hey everyone, how's it going today?
Hope you're having a great one. So today we're talking contracts negotiation. I'm one of those people that I feel like I've gotten into contracts, have lawyers, looked at them, spent millions of dollars actually with lawyers. And at the end of the day, I still ended up on the short end of the stick. So, I'm so glad to be able to talking to someone who can walk us through that of what to look for, how to negotiate contracts, and what you should be looking for when you're entering into a contract to get the best deal for yourself. So today we're going to welcome Jeanette Nyden. Thank you so much.
Hi, hello, I'm happy to be here.
Tell us, Jeanette, a little bit about yourself and how you got into this and becoming a lawyer and a negotiator.
Yeah, thank you. So I am a lawyer. I'm licensed in the state of Washington. And about 20 years ago, I was negotiating a settlement agreement, and a gentleman, my client, said to me offhand, "Boy, if you could just teach my salespeople to do what you did, I'd pay you for that," was the conversation. And so a whole enterprise and company was born at that time. So I've had the great privilege of spending the last 20 years teaching non-lawyers to negotiate complex contracts with accuracy, nuance, and confidence.
Wow. I think this is the really need on so many different levels. So how do you maximize the value to your customers? What's like the first things that you're teaching to get that relationship and maximize the value?
Yeah, so two audiences. So if the customer comes to me and says, "How do I maximize the deal?" they really have to understand what the business objectives and outcomes need to be. Then when the salespeople come to me and say, "How do I maximize this deal?" they have to provide a profitable deal, meaning that there's margins meeting those business objectives that the customer has laid out. That is so fundamental, and sometimes it's missing. And what I mean by that is that the company has not spent enough time developing the business case and the outcomes that they want, because I'm in a world with very complex contracts. It's not as easy as, I want to hire a graphic artist sort of thing, so we have to be very conscientious about the outcomes in the business case. So then the supplier or service provider can then meet them profitably on those business objectives and within that business case.
That makes sense. So that's kind of goes into the price. So how do you choose the right price mechanism and prepare for that negotiating the price?
Right, because a lot of companies like fixed price agreements because it provides a certain amount of budget certainty. That goes back to the business case. Why are we hiring this service provider in the first place? But we can get lots of really bad pricing mechanisms. And so there's time and materials, there's fixed fee, and there's this other mechanism called cost plus, and then nuances within them. The problem is that service providers, they want time and materials because they're not 100% sure what's going on, what they're going to meet. When they get in there and start working on it, the business objectives are not crystal clear, so they could lose money on a fixed fee. The customer wants a fixed fee. I want to know how much I have to budget for this particular service, and I want to hold you accountable to that, but I'm unclear about some things. And so that's really where you start to get a lot of tension, because they're misaligned from the beginning, and what the objectives are, and then how to price that, and in what mechanism to use that's going to be efficient from a value perspective.
That makes sense. My experience is that, you don't know really what's going to turn upside down in the contract until it happens to you. Then you're like, what did it say about this? Because this went wrong. How do you identify the risk and make sure you don't get screwed, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. So again, I work with both sides. I both work with both procurement and sales professionals. On the procurement side, I really emphasize in the pre-award phase, you really have to look for risks, and I call them the operational risks. That's the stuff, Melanie, we should anticipate, and we don't spend enough time on that because we're spending all this time on the legal boilerplate language. So we really have to look at it. So a really simple example is handoffs. So think about it, Melanie, I'm sure in your work career, you've handed work off to somebody else who then hands part of that work off to somebody else. And then as a complete package, it has to go back through somebody and then back to you. Those are all places in customer supplier relationships where there's huge risk of it. Anytime work is being handed and managed. And so that is a really great way for someone on the purchasing team to understand the risk. Where are the handoffs and where are their potential risk events? On the supplier side, what I encourage suppliers to do is, because they're the expert in their business, they really have to come forward and spot the risks in the agreement and find a diplomatic way to say, this is a risk you hadn't thought of, and this is how we typically address it with other clients and customers. Otherwise, you're right. The risk event happens, the loss happens, everyone feels screwed, and sometimes a lot of money is at stake.
And how do you do, in negotiation, a lot of it is posturing.
Yeah.
Right. So, who has like the upper hand on the handshake, who is, whoever talks least sometimes is the winner, they say. How do you get the most influence when you're negotiating?
Yeah. So some of the things that you talk about, quite frankly, are kind of white male, old school stuff from the 70s, because we don't meet. I mean, look at us. We're not going to meet in person. We're on Zoom. So much of what we do in Zoom. And so it isn't about, who speaks the least or who speaks the most. You can't slam out of a room to try to show that you're really angry. There isn't, a sense of how to manipulate the handshake. I mean, a lot of those things are antiquated just simply because of our embracing technology. So the way that I work, because I work with complex subjects and complex contracts, is it's really about making your message attractive. And a lot of what I teach people to do is how to really deeply listen to what is being said, how to reframe what's being said in a positive way to reach an agreement, even when you think that you are at odds with each other about a particular topic or comment. And when you can deeply listen and you can make the message that you are trying to convey attractive to the listener, you're more likely to reach an agreement. So let me give you a really quick example. So in a coaching call earlier this week, I'm working with someone who's very new to the purchasing function in oil and gas. And then her manager, who's not new, is on the phone to try to provide support. But really the negotiations had gotten to an impasse. And so they called me for coaching and said, what's the next step? And so I go through my impasse questionnaire, is this happening? All right, great. You're really at an impasse. And I coach them on how to write a really great email to encapsulate the fact that they've made a very reasonable, in my estimation, proposal to settle this situation, and the other company is really digging their heels in, so they're escalating it to their boss, but they're not tattletelling on, we'll just call him Bob. They are actually saying, these are the facts, we agree on the facts, you guys offered this, we cannot support that, we countered offered with this, and since then, we've had no forward progress to try to reach an agreement. What do you suggest? How can we resolve this? Because none of us wants this to, play itself out and get our, legal teams involved. And that's a way of making your message very attractive. They didn't throw Bob under the bus. They didn't do anything that was incendiary. They didn't do things that like posturing and stuff like that. They just laid it all out and said, what's the next step? How do we get this resolved? And that's part of that, making that message attractive. And what they're actually doing is they're being very influential without having to use inauthentic power plays to try to be influential.
That makes sense. So I've heard of trade-offs. Would this be a time when you would do trade-offs, or
That's
what exactly does
exactly
that mean? What is
right.
a trade-off?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what they were doing, is they were trying to understand the right balance of trade-offs. So a trade-off triggers the obligation of reciprocity. So we all know this obligation from childhood. Back in the day, I probably make parents cringe, but my sister and I would just get pillowcases full of food at Halloween, full of candies and stuff like that. And we'd dump these pillowcases out. My dad would come in and grab, like, because he loves Snickers, he'd grab 1 or 2 Snickers, and that was the parent tax. And then we were left with these big piles, and then we'd start trading. You know what I mean? Like we'd start to say like what we were going to absolutely not trade, and then what was open for trading. And then we sort of look and see, what we were going to trade with each other. And then there was the pile of the unwanted candy, which actually wasn't very much, but you know what I mean? And so we do that even as adults. And we do this with really sophisticated concepts. This idea of, okay, I've got this big, suitcase or pillowcase full of stuff, and I'm going to start parsing it out. What I am not willing to give, what I am willing to give, what I'm not willing to receive when I take a look and see what's over there after they dump out their pillowcase full of stuff. And it's very dynamic because I'm not just dealing with one issue. I'm dealing with pricing mechanisms and contract terms and statements of work and technical specifications. And so we still have that concept, though, of reciprocity. If I give something to you, the expectation is that you're going to give me something back in return. And that's basically what this concept of trade-offs is. That's the fancy word in negotiation.
So how do you deal with, you get into a contract, you think you've negotiated it well, and then you realize, like, that word, I think I'm getting screwed, or this isn't working out for me, things have changed. How do you get out of it? And, sometimes I have a situation where a friend of mine's business, they were in with someone who's referring business to them, and they realized they were taking a much bigger percentage. They said, hey, we want to unwind from this. And like, well, not only are we, okay, we're going to end this relationship, but we're going to take the people we brought to you away from you and put them with somebody else now. So all of a sudden they lost 50% of their business. How do you unwind a contract that it still is favorable for you? And how do you figure out the lessons that you've learned to protect yourself for the next time?
Yeah, I'm going to take the second part first. I mean, the only way you can unwind an agreement that's favorable for you is if you understand what's going to trigger your need to leave before the contract has fully run its duration or its course. So you're going to have to do some sort of a risk analysis. And that's really where you need to get involved with experts such as yourself. What are the potential pitfalls? How do people become at odds with one another? What are the challenges? And they can be external challenges. Amazon, when they went to self-publishing, I mean, that really upended the publishing world. My ex-husband at the time owned a used bookstore. So, we were living this firsthand all those many years ago. And so some of it we cannot predict, and some of it we can predict. For the things that we can predict, we need to build the contract right in the first place. And if you are the receiving end of someone else's contract, then you really do have to get an expert in that industry to be able to read it and review it and issue spot. Because it sounds like from that example about the higher percentage than anticipated, and now we're going to take our people away. Those things were embedded in the contract, but without the eye of expertise, they were overlooked. And then they come back out as weapons when the situation is not as anticipated.
Right. So is there a way to modify a contract? Is that a thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the contracts that I work with, we absolutely do have provisions to modify. I will say, though, that governments, you really can't modify their contracts. So federal government, state, municipalities, they typically do not allow for any kinds of modifications, and that's its own subset of contracts. In the commercial area where I work, yeah, there absolutely is a way to modify a contract. And it's as simple as both people agreeing to what the contract modifications are going to be and signing it, and the contract is modified, unless it says, hey, this contract cannot be modified under any circumstances. Then you have to cancel that contract and start all over again.
All right. So for those of you who aren't in business, but you're in life or you're in business, and we're all in the business of life. I'm just going to unpack this to say the things that we learned is, when you're negotiating with someone, to be a good listener. Jeanette had said, so how, think about how that relates in your marriage, your friend
Yes.
relationship, your relationships as a parent, to take the time before you're, hammering down something, listen to the other party when you're doing it. And trade-offs, right? That happens even with your kids. Make some trade-offs. It doesn't have to be your way or the highway to have that. And make sure you review the contract. So I'm reviewing, like, when you're in a marriage or relationship, the contract that you had before you had kids, your relationship was one way. Now, all of a sudden you have little kids, you might have to modify that contract of, hey, who's going to get up in the middle of the night? Who's going to do this? And adjust your contracts with each other in life. So I think the lessons that Jeanette is teaching us about contract negotiations really apply to your everyday life as well. Don't you think, Jeanette?
3 cheers. You really nailed it, Melanie. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, and I'm sure negotiating works really well too. In your life, you can do a lot of negotiating if you know how to do it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, think about, trying to review a contract to purchase a home or to purchase a vehicle or to help your teen or adult child, rent their first apartment. I mean, there's all these ways in which contracts impact our life. And those 3 principles that Melanie just went through apply for those sorts of situations too. So negotiation is really ubiquitous. Like, we're always negotiating with people. We're always trying to listen. We're always trying to make trade-offs. We're always trying to pay attention to what's going on.
So true. Well, thanks for being with us today, Jeanette. Very insightful.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be with you.
Tell us where people can go to find you and get more information.
So my website is www.jnyden.com. That's jnyden.com.
Perfect. We'll put that up in the show notes.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks for joining us. And if you're looking to become an author and write a book, just like Jeanette did, she wrote 4 of them. Look us up at eliteonlinepublishing.com and hit the author submission button, and we'll see if you're a good fit for us. Have a great week, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.